Here we are, folks. We are officially live. This is episode 9 of The People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast. I don't know how you can say philosophical podcast without using that voice. I dare you to try. I'll wait. No, I'm just teasing. So I am here today with John Lord and Marcia Smelly. We will get started very, very soon. But I kind of just sort of chit chat a little bit at the beginning. There's a little bit of a delay when it goes live. For anybody who is watching the episode 9 today, which is going to focus on a new vision for older adults, by all means, put comments. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, you can throw some comments in there. If you have questions, throw them in, etc. I am so very blessed to be joined with my special guest today, and so very blessed to be hosting this conversation in my home in Kitchener. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the neutral people. I have been taught when doing a land acknowledgement that the description of or finding out what land you're on is easy. You Google that, you can find that out. The real work and the reason why land acknowledgements are so critical to reconciliation is taking some time to make a concrete connection between the reality of having a conversation on stolen land and the conversation, the topic that you're about to engage in. And today, my friends, we are going to be speaking to John and Marcia about the importance of elders in our community. What I have learned in my experience working with various Indigenous communities and Indigenous community members here in Kitchener Centre, but also in some of the other paths that I have taken, is the understanding of the importance of elders as knowledge holders and history keepers and wisdom carriers. And what I've often found fascinating to watch, because in some cultures it's not like that. I'm Jamaican. In my own experience as a Jamaican, first generation Canadian, raised by my Jamaican parents, you are supposed to revere your elders. Your elders hold a really special place in the community and in your family. And so some things that are kind of normal in Canadian culture are very different for me. Like in my upbringing, would never really think about long-term care as a solution to anything. We have multi-generational homes because that's how we were born and raised, and you learn from the interaction between those generations. And when I think about the ways in which Indigenous communities have been able to hold down the culture, the knowledge, the wisdom, the histories in the ways that they have, they've done so by revering their elders. And there's been lots of moments, even in Kitchener Centre, where we've seen this interaction between elders and community and the younger generations doing really powerful ceremonies. If you think back to September 30th at Healing of the Seven Generations, there's this moment during that ceremony where the elder who was speaking to us about what we all needed to do to ensure that the lives taken from residential schools and the children found across Turtle Island were finally on a path to where they needed to be within this bigger universe. And he called on young children to come and be part of that ceremony. And you saw this engagement in a really real way. That is what I hope this new vision for older adults in not just in Kitchener Centre, but across the province and hopefully across the world can be. And I think we can learn a lot by thinking about how those interactions are. And so with that, I'm going to introduce all of you who are watching episode 9 of People in My Hood. And yes, I'm going to sing it. I think I should sing it every time. Feel free to join me. These are the people in my neighborhood. Yeah, in my neighborhood. Wow, in my neighborhood. Yes, John is a person in my neighborhood. And Marcia, they are people that we meet when we're walking down the street. They're the people that we meet each day. I don't know how you thought that I was. Did you really think it was going to stop? Never. No. Never. Okay. We are going to jump in. So I am here with John Lord and Marcia Smelly. I have met them both in a variety of capacities in some of my advocacy with Marcia in particular, I had met her for other reasons. But when I started to put together this private members bill calling for a seniors advocate, I was truly honored to be introduced to you, John, and get an opportunity to speak to you about what the bill could do and what a new vision could look like. And with Marcia, it was a similar thing. When I actually first got into the community, Marcia is one of the first people that I met as I was sort of trying to get my grounding in community. And so you have helped me with a variety of things, Marcia, and I am so grateful. But we're just going to dive right in. My first question, as I always start off with in the People in My Hood, a philosophical podcast, is simple. Where are the gaps in the systems that are meant to support older adults? And I'm going to start with you, John. Talk to me and go wherever you need. Where do you feel are the major gaps in the ways that we think about these systems surrounding older adults?
Well, thanks, Laura May. It's great to see you and to be here. I loved your introduction today. And because really what that does is present a bit of a vision. And the hugest gap we have is really a long way from that. Because ageism still exists, right? As you say, you grew up in a country where elders were honored. And that's the kind of world we're trying to create. We're trying to create a world where elders are respected and honored, and where their place is in community, with families, with friends, with neighbors. That's what we really want to work on, right? So, but I think when it comes to really elder care or elder support, one of the hugest gaps is the lack of a robust home care system. And just to give you one example, there are literally hundreds, and it's probably in the thousands by now, of people who are in hospital waiting to go home. And what they're really waiting for is long-term care, because the home care system is so inadequate these days that people can't go home to heal, to mend, to thrive. So that's a huge gap. And I guess for us, I represent, I do a lot of local work, as you know, but I'm also part of Seniors for Social Action Ontario, which is a provincial advocacy group. And our idea is that people should be able to age well in their communities, in neighborhoods. And I can talk about that some more later, but that's a very important part. And there's a huge gap right now because long-term care seems to be this grand narrative in North America. It's the grand narrative that says, as you get a little bit frail and elderly, we have a place for you. Yeah. But it's away from us. It's away from community. It's away from friends. It's away from family. So that's a huge gap, is to try to find ways to find alternatives to that so people can really age well. And that if we deal with ageism and if we deal with systems, those are the two things that really we have to work on at the same time. So I appreciate your vision, your idea that we, are in community together. That's what you're really all about, is the work you're doing.
Thank you, John. It's funny, as you were speaking about the idea of so many people in hospital waiting to go home, I couldn't not reimagine myself. There was a time where my partner was quite ill, navigating cancer and chemo and all of that stuff. And what it triggered for me as you were speaking was the second round of chemo. Because in the second round of chemo, they have you do that at home, because the thought process is you heal better in the place that you feel the most comfort and love and care. And so if we do that when it comes to an illness like that, then why wouldn't we do that for the people that are literally holding all of the wisdom for our community and all of these histories? Like, why are we not ensuring that we invest in robust ways in making sure that people can be where they feel the most loved and cared for, right? Marcia, I'm going to throw it over to you, the exact same question.
Wow.
Where do you think that gap is?
Well, John's right. It starts with this notion that as you grow old, you really don't have much use or significance. I could even go as far as to say the whole notion of this nuclear family is something that we need to think about. It's great that, you want this small group of people to take care of themselves, or, but what happens over time, you need to go beyond that. And so the gap is ageism for sure. And this notion that you can build your way out of something, you can build buildings and put people in them and that will solve it. Well,
Yes.
no, that's warehousing people. That's really not home. That is creating, kind of like an industrial model, almost like an assembly line to put people in. Well, human beings don't thrive in those kind of settings. As a matter of fact, many people decline very rapidly. And if you talk to people who have their loved ones in some of those places, they will say to you that one of the things we notice is that there is a decline, especially during the pandemic when people couldn't get in. There was, it took, so long for the system to be able to figure out how could we get the loved ones to come back in, because the caregivers in those institutions realize they cannot provide all the care. I mean, even if you have somebody in a long-term care facility, you need to have the family and friends and so forth to help keep that person vibrant. And without that, we know that many, 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 failed. Okay. So I think we have to rethink this industrial model that we can throw money at something and it's going to work. This is not something that you can throw money at exclusively. We do need money, but not necessarily in the current model. I was talking to somebody the other day and they said, we have like 40,000 people waiting, quote, for long-term care, but we also have probably more than that waiting for home care. Right?
Yes.
And where's most of the budget going at the provincial level? It's going to institutional care as opposed to trying to keep people in their homes and community. So there's a real gap in the thinking. Why is government thinking one way and we as community citizens thinking another? So there's another gap.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic, Marcia. I keep, as I do this, I'm always making notes of just some of the brilliance that comes from these conversations. But this idea of home versus this industrial warehousing model is so critical, because this is all also happening at the same time that we've got an affordable housing crisis, right? And so a lot of folks that are waiting in particular housing aren't necessarily going to be able to afford the kinds of upgrades or the kinds of housing that they need as they age. And if we actually care about people having access to homes, and your home and housing is a human right, then we would be investing in that. Those are the upstream supports that help us to hold older adults with care and love and compassion. It doesn't make any other sense to do what we're doing, which is literally rerouting money that could ensure that we don't have the problem that we have, and putting it towards a solution that becomes a little bit of our own making. It's like we're making our own problem when all we're doing is focusing on long-term care and this warehousing. And that, my friends, because this is a philosophical podcast, is literally what ageism is. Like that, what we are talking about right now, the choices that elected officials make, what we invest in and what we don't, is how these kinds of systems perpetuate the ageism that we are discussing and that John began this conversation with, right? So I'm gonna actually keep it with you, Marcia, and then we'll go to John for the second question. What does leadership in this area look like? And before I ask you to start speaking about that, Marcia, I just want folks that are tuning in to know why, right? The reason I'm gonna mute Marcia for just 1 second. I think it's Marcia.
Yes, there was a phone.
It's a phone. Don't worry. See, we good. We understand. We're all so good with this technology. I'm muting you for 1 second, Marcia, and as soon as it's done, you can unmute. But the reason I asked this question about what leadership looks like is because I have found that sometimes people want to solve a problem and they don't know how. And so I think it's important for us to say, we are clear about this problem. Leadership looks like this. Then the people that you elect can choose to do those things or choose not to. And when you go to the ballot box, you can make choices about who it is that you're going to have do this work. Some might say no, some might say yes. But if we have a clarity about what leadership looks like, then I feel like we can start to make some real changes in the world. So I'm going to just check and see where Marcia's at.
Yep, good.
Are you good? Okay, good.
Yeah,
so what does leadership look like for you in this area?
I think, you know, I have joined various groups around the region, and it's clear to me that we have some excellent advocates, and excellent opportunities for people to network to resolve these issues. And I'm not sure who the current leadership are listening to, but clearly they're not listening enough to the people who live it, who live on the ground, who are living with issues relating to their loved ones, whether they be you know, physically challenged people, people with mental issues, whatever the issue is. I'm not sure that they're really listening, or the current leadership is listening as much to that segment of the population as they need to. And so to me, that's number one. That's leadership needs to listen to the people who are actually living it, and or the people who are working in those sectors, because they know what the challenges are and how they the responses that they're getting from their clients. So I think leadership in this area requires it requires more than a business case, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
This isn't just about how to maximize every dollar. There's more to it than that. And maybe that's not necessarily what you're looking for in terms of leadership, but I think our voices need to be heard, especially those who are living with the child. I mean, I had an almost 90-year-old mother at home. And I was, luckily for me, I was able to stop working because I was close to retirement to take care of her. But not everybody has those opportunities. Other parts of the world, I think we've got in my opinion, a very different view in North America to other parts of the world. So for example, Denmark and Holland and even the UK, where I was born, has a slightly different approach to taking care. And a lot of the care takes place in the home in the UK, based on my experience. So, and families are supported in giving that care. So I think we really need to think about, our leaders need to look around the rest of the world to how we can maximize the resources that we have, and also provide the kind of nurturing that our frail and elderly may need. I think that's a start. Anyway, I'm sure John's got lots more to say.
Thank you so much for that, Marcia. It's so interesting as I do more of these sessions, even though I'm going through a bunch of different topics, because I wanted this to be a real philosophical discussion about the things that I'm learning. And as I ask that second question time and again, listening is key. And not just listening to anybody, but listening to the actual people who will be impacted by the political decisions that you are about to make. Like, imagine that, folks. Imagine that. So over to you, John. What does leadership look like in this area to address some of those gaps you've talked about?
Well, I think Marcia did a great summary. I think number one for me is the same. We have to listen to elders. And you'd be amazed how much wisdom you will discover when you actually listen to people. And just a little bit of research that people may not know about, but there's been several studies which have actually surveyed people over age 55. And every survey shows, well over 90% of people say they do not want to end up in a long-term care facility. So the point is, people want to age at home. People want to age in their own community. So the first thing, absolutely, as Marcia said, is listening to the people experiencing the issues. But I think, secondly, I would like leadership to base their decisions on evidence. Really look at what is the research showing. What have we really found as we look around the world, as we look at the studies that are coming out of Canada, the United States, Europe, Japan? What are we actually learning? And there's so much that we're learning. And Marcia suggested looking at Holland and Great Britain and Denmark for sure. I mean, just one statistic, which is very interesting. We spend 87% of dollars spent on elder care. We spend it on long-term care nursing homes, and only 13% on home care. We are the lowest of all the OCDE countries, which are like the advanced democracies. We're the lowest of all those countries in terms of expenditures on home care. Denmark, for example, spends 36% on nursing homes and 64% on home and community care. So you can see a radical difference.
Yeah.
A lot of these European countries and Japan have been shifting to more community models. So that's the second thing I would say. Leadership has to really use evidence as the basis, and they're not doing that at the moment. In Ontario, the government is not basing their decisions. They're basing their decisions on fixing long-term care.
Yeah.
And actually, just as an aside, but it's actually probably very poignant, there was a study that came out yesterday from the University of Waterloo that showed that those nursing homes that are part of a conglomerate private care, had far more deaths during COVID than the nonprofits or the municipalities. And this new study shows that actually their quality of care was not as good. So that's just an aside, but it relates to leadership. Leadership would be moving us towards a more nonprofit care model.
Yeah.
And I think, Laura May, the last thing I would say about leadership is I think leaders would then design a collaborative design, right? Where elders and service providers and politicians, we would all be at the table together.
Yeah.
We're not very good at that in Canada anymore. We seem to have lost that idea that you could have collaborative tables. We used to do that very well in anti-poverty initiatives, but there's so many initiatives where we could do that collaborative design work. And that would be a third thing I think I'd say about the need for leadership.
Thank you so much for that. It's funny because as you were speaking, one of the I decided I was going to answer my own question. I'm assuming I'm allowed to do whatever I want since it's my podcast. So if I had one thing that I would want as a sign of leadership, it would be to give all of these odd advisory committees that everybody makes up once they're elected actual power to be able to do the work that they're advising on.
Yeah.
Because what I'm seeing is such a breakdown. So we have a big problem. We say we're going to talk to people and consult. And then there seems to be this weird thing that even at the end of all of those consultations, the politician believes that they can just do whatever they want anyway. So either don't waste people's time and let them do what they need to do in their life, or actually listen to them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And a great example is this week, the Ford government's advisory committee on affordable housing came out with a terrific report. But will it be implemented? We'll see. But if it is, by the way, that will have huge benefits for the elderly population as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's the thing. We have report after report after report and advice after advice that tells us what we can do to make things better. But if you have consecutive governments that don't implement them, even like a part of them, then we're always starting behind the 8 ball by the time you get new people elected, right? So I'm totally with you. And now, my friends, as we go into the last question is always my favorite because it is the visionary question. I believe really strongly that we have to start putting into the universe concrete examples of what it looks like when these problems are fixed. Right? So we can spend a lot of time talking about the intricacies of how ageism operates, and it is important for us to do that. But I think sometimes we do that at the expense of putting into the world the vision. And so as we talk to both John and Marcia, as I'm speaking to both of you, and you have these experiences of other jurisdictions that have done things differently to invest in the care and love and support and compassion that older adults deserve, I want us to imagine that we wake up and every problem and every gap that we are thinking about are fixed. Older adults are thriving. Things are good. What does that look like? What does that look like? Marcia, you get to start. Bring it.
All right.
Bring it.
First and foremost, it would look, it would be small, that we would have opportunities for people to stay in their neighborhoods and in their communities, number one. The other thing, that the system that we would create to accommodate that would be nonprofit. Because I cannot, if indeed people are frail and fragile and need support, to me that's health. Why is it that a system that would be generating a profit? And, no, that's not, when we're taking care of people, it's not about making money. And I believe that home care could be provided in a nonprofit way in smaller residential type situations. And even let's go one step further, that we would develop a way to support families to appoint a caregiver that would be able to stay home with those individuals who need that kind of care. So to me, that would be important. We also need a certain amount of what we call flexibility to whatever system it is that we set up. So it needs to be portable so that the people wouldn't be stuck. So for example, if they left Waterloo Region, all of a sudden their opportunity to get care is, they're going to go to the bottom of some list somewhere. No,
Yes.
We shouldn't have that. We should have whatever the care dollars are or the care supports that are with a person, they should be able to be portable and move around. So those are just some of the things. And again, the notion of small, residential, community-based, not having to move somebody 100 kilometers because that's the closest home that we could find to put them in. No, we've got to do better than that. So I would see things being much more community-driven, community-focused, and it is possible to do. We just need to think outside of the current boxes that we're thinking in.
Yes. I love it. John, put some visioning into the universe. All the problems are fixed. What does it look like?
Well, I agree with what Marcia said. That's a great beginning. That's like the foundation, that it's community-based.
Yep.
I just think I would add that I think, the community support associations, of which there are a couple in KW, do really important work. I think if all these problems were fixed, I would see those guys having more funding so that they could support the informal sector and the informal supports that people need. And what I mean by that is very little of what we receive in our lives comes from the paid sector, from the formal sector. A lot of what we do is informal, right? So I live in an apartment building where I know my neighbors, our neighbors share a lot. Some of us are older, there's younger people as well in the apartment building. So that kind of thing to support, and there is a movement called naturally occurring retirement communities, which is growing, where people in an apartment building or in a neighborhood could get together and support each other. But that needs a little bit of facilitation, right? And that's why the Community Support Association could be very valuable in nurturing that kind of informal support. On the formal side, I would agree. I think we need I would see a robust home care system, which also had part of that as direct funding. And by that, I mean the person who needed home care could choose.
Yeah.
They could have an agency provide support, or they could say, I'm going to hire my own worker. You give me the money and I will provide. I might hire a nurse that lives in my neighborhood. I might hire somebody in my network that's been very active. And I would add to that, I would think in a comprehensive system, you'd also see a family support system. Newfoundland has that, actually. Newfoundland has a system that pays caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
So, a loved one to stay at home with their spouse or with their family or their mother and father, things like that. So the formal system would also have, as Marcia suggested, smaller homes in the community. Imagine KW, where we probably, if you take Waterloo Region, we probably have 15 or 20 neighborhoods. Imagine if all of those neighborhoods, or even half of the neighborhoods, imagine, 10 or 12 small homes scattered throughout Waterloo Region, where people, if they needed that extra support, could go and live with 4, 5, 6 other people in a small home. We've seen that with people with developmental disabilities. We've done that very well in Canada, not so well everywhere, but we have good models of providing small residential supports for people.
Oh, I love it. It is my favorite part of the podcast because I love taking some time to remind the world that we can do things differently, that we can do better.
We can do this.
Mm-hmm. The models exist. It's the political will. And when I say political will, I don't just mean from the elected officials, but I mean the will of the people, right? Like we as community members must demand better for our families, for our loved ones, for ourselves. And then from our elected officials, we can make sure that they do those investments. And I really, really, truly believe that we can.
Absolutely. I would actually just encourage, Laura, I would really encourage anybody on this podcast, to write your MVP, to let people know what you feel about these issues, because that's going to make the change when governments and when leaders of all stripes begin to see that there's a movement.
Yes, definitely. And what does happen, in case anybody is wondering, is when we are inundated, when our offices are inundated with people's letters, it forces action because they know they can't ignore it. If you get 1 or 2 letters, they sometimes think that they can sort of, we'll just keep going the same track because we don't have enough people. So imagine the letters that you write as the evidence that John was pointing to before, because that becomes evidence for elected officials of the direction that they should take and when they need to pivot to another direction. So none of this can happen without all of you. So thank you. Like literally, thank you. Thank you for the advocacy, both you, John, and you, Marcia, that you do on the ground all the time to make sure that folks are okay. Thank you to everybody who's watching. To those who are watching this later, please know that you can always put comments on the feed. You can always email my office. You know how to reach me. You know how to find me. And this, my friends, is the end of episode, is it 9? What? 9 episodes. One day I woke up and I was like, I should have a podcast, and everybody laughed at me. And now I'm on episode 9. So yay, me.
Good job.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
Way to go.
Thank you.
Listen, goodbye, everyone. Have a great day, and please stay safe.